The year is 1945. Victory in Europe. Victory in Japan. The most successful fighter aircraft in American history. The P-51 Mustang has just won the war in the skies. Over 15,000 built. Squadrons spread across 3 continents. The aircraft that turned the tide over Germany, that escorted every bomber home, that made the Luftwaffe irrelevant. And then almost overnight, the United States government ordered them destroyed, not mothballed, not stored, destroyed. Thousands of them, bulldozed into pits, burned, scrapped for aluminum worth less than a new refrigerator. The most advanced piston engine fighter ever designed was being erased from existence faster than it had been built. Within 2 years of VJ Day, more than 10,000 P-51 Mustangs simply vanished. But not all of them, because what happened next reveals something most histories skip over entirely. The Mustang didn't retire quietly into museums. It became the centerpiece of a global arms race that most Americans never knew existed. It fought in wars on 4 continents. It was smuggled across borders in the dead of night. It became the most sought-after weapon on the black market. And in the hands of pilots who weren't American, it would rack up kill records that made its World War II service look almost cautious by comparison. This is the story of what really happened to the P-51 Mustang after the war ended. And it starts with a decision that still doesn't make sense. August 1945. The Pentagon has a problem. Across the Pacific, across Europe, across training bases in the continental United States, there are 14,948 P-51 Mustangs in active service. Each one cost the American taxpayer approximately $50,000 to build, over $800,000 in today's money. The total fleet represents an investment of roughly $12 billion in current value. The Army Air Forces proposes keeping them, maintaining a ready reserve. After all, the Mustang is only 3 years into its operational life. The airframe is sound. The Packard Merlin engine, now that all the teething problems have been solved, is the most reliable power plant America has ever produced. These aircraft could serve for another decade minimum. Congress says no. Not because the Mustang is obsolete. It isn't. In 1945, it's still the fastest, longest-ranged fighter in the American arsenal. The problem is purely economic. Each Mustang and storage costs money, maintenance, climate control, preservation, guard details. And in 1945, with 16 million men returning from overseas, with war production contracts being canceled by the thousands, with entire factories going dark, Congress sees a military that's too big and too expensive. The order comes down: disposition the fleet, sell what you can, scrap the rest. The fire sales begin immediately. By September 1945, the War Assets Administration is auctioning off Mustangs for whatever they can get. The results are shocking. A combat veteran P-51D, fresh from the European theater, with less than 200 hours on the airframe, sells for an average of $1,500. Some go for as little as $750. For context, a new Buick sedan cost $1,400. The buyers aren't collectors, they're scrappers. Men with cutting torches and smelting contracts. Because in 1945, aluminum is worth 23 cents a pound, and a P-51 Mustang contains approximately 1,700 pounds of it. The math is brutal and simple. A scrapper can buy a Mustang for $1,500, cut it apart in an afternoon, and sell the aluminum for $1,656. $56 profit per aircraft. Multiply that by 1,000 units and you're talking real money. And so they die. By the hundreds, by the thousands. Across airfields in California, Texas, Arizona, Alabama, the cutting begins. Wings separated from fuselages, engines pulled, propellers stacked like cordwood, the aircraft that outfought the Luftwaffe reduced to ingots. But the War Assets Administration makes one critical mistake. They assume the only buyers will be American. They're wrong. In Sweden, the Air Force is desperate, caught between Stalin's Soviet Union to the east and a now occupied Germany to the south. Sweden needs fighters, modern fighters, fast, The problem is, Sweden stayed neutral during the war, and now none of the Allied powers will sell them anything. Britain says no. France says no. The United States says no officially. Unofficially, in November 1945, a Swedish procurement officer named Bo Widfeld walks into a War Assets Administration office in Newark, New Jersey, and asks a very specific question. Are there any restrictions on who can buy surplus aircraft? The clerk checks the regulations. There are restrictions on weapons, on ammunition, on classified technology. But a bare airframe, an engine, those are just aluminum and steel. Scrap metal. No restrictions. Widfeld buys 50 P-51D Mustangs for $4,000 each. They're created, marked as industrial machinery, and shipped to Gothenburg. By March 1946, the Swedish Air Force is flying American Mustangs with Swedish roundels. They'll keep them in service until 1954. Word spreads. Switzerland buys 130 Mustangs between 1946 and 1948. They re-engine some with Swiss-built Hispano-Suiza motors when Packard Merlin parts become scarce. The Swiss will fly their Mustangs until 1958, longer than the United States did. The Dutch buy 40. The Italians buy 173. The Australians, who actually fought alongside American Mustang squadrons during the war, buy 80. But the most important buyer is a country that doesn't officially exist yet. In Palestine in 1947, the Jewish paramilitary organizations are preparing for a war they know is coming. The British mandate is collapsing. The United Nations is voting on partition. And when the British leave, 5 Arab armies have already promised to invade. The Jews have small arms, some mortars, a handful of armored cars. What they don't have is an air force. What they need is something fast enough to intercept Egyptian Spitfires and Syrian T-6 Texans, something with enough range to strike targets deep inside enemy territory, something that can turn the entire strategic picture upside down. They need Mustangs. But the United States has an arms embargo in place. Selling military aircraft to either side in Palestine is illegal, federal offense, prison time, so they get creative. A Jewish businessman named Al Schwimmer, a former flight engineer with TWA, starts buying scrap Mustangs through front companies. He pays rock-bottom prices, $1,500 to $2,000 per airframe for aircraft the sellers assume will be cut up for metal. Instead, Schwimmer has them quietly transported to a remote airfield in Burbank, California, where a team of former Army Air Forces mechanics, all of them Jewish, all of them volunteers, begins a secret restoration program. They're not just restoring them, they're smuggling them. The plan is audacious. The Mustangs will be flown to Panama, then to Brazil, then across the Atlantic to Czechoslovakia, one of the few countries willing to help the Jews, and from there, disassembled and trucked overland to Palestine. 16,000 miles, most of it over open ocean. In aircraft that have been sitting in desert boneyards for 2 years, the FBI knows something is happening. But Schwimmer is careful. The aircraft are registered as civilian racers. The flight plans list the destination as South America Agricultural Survey work. When the first Mustang takes off from Burbank in March 1948, it's painted bright yellow with California Air Services stenciled on the fuselage. It lands in Zatek, Czechoslovakia, 6 weeks later. By May 1948, when Israel declares independence and the Arab armies invade, Schwimmer has delivered 25 P-51 Mustangs. The Israeli Air Force doesn't even officially exist yet, but it has Mustangs, and they're about to change the course of the war. The first combat mission is May 29, 1948. Egyptian forces are advancing on Tel Aviv. Spitfires and Macchi fighters are strafing Israeli positions with impunity. The ragtag Israeli pilots, most of them foreign volunteers, Americans and South Africans and Canadians who flew in World War II, are flying a motley collection of Czech trainers and salvaged British biplanes. They're being slaughtered. Then 4 Mustangs arrive. The lead pilot is Lou Lenart, a former Marine Corps aviator from Pennsylvania. His wingman is a South African named Eddie Cohen. Neither of them has flown a Mustang in combat before. They've had less than 4 hours of checkout time in the aircraft. The radios don't work. The gun sights are misaligned. One of the planes has an engine that's misfiring on 3 cylinders. They take off anyway. The Egyptian column is near Ashdod, 20 miles south of Tel Aviv. Trucks, half-tracks, armor all moving north. Lenart doesn't have bombs, he doesn't have rockets. He has 6.5D caliber machine guns and 1,880 rounds of ammunition. He makes one pass. The Egyptian column stops, not because of casualties. Lenart's misaligned guns barely hit anything. They stop because the Egyptians have no idea the Israelis have fighters. The psychological effect is immediate. The Egyptians dig in, call for air support, halt the advance. Tel Aviv is saved by 4 Mustangs that barely worked. But the real killing starts 3 weeks later. June 18, 1948. An Israeli Mustang pilot named Rudy Augerton, an American volunteer from New York, spots an Egyptian Dakota transport escorted by 2 Spitfires near Rehavat. Augerton is alone. The Spitfire is, theoretically, a better dogfighter than the Mustang at low altitude. But Augerton has one advantage. He's a better pilot. The fight lasts 90 seconds. Augerton kills the Dakota first, a clean deflection shot that sends it spiraling into the ground. The 2 Spitfires break and run. Augerton chases one down and kills it with a 3-second burst at 400 yards. The other escapes. It's the first confirmed air-to-air kill by an Israeli Mustang. There will be many more. By the end of the 1948 war, Israeli Mustangs have flown over 1,800 combat sorties. They've shot down 9 Egyptian aircraft, 3 Syrian, and 2 Iraqi. They've destroyed over 200 vehicles, 17 tanks, and 3 bridges. And they've done it with fewer than 30 operational Mustangs, most of which were scrapped surplus the United States sold for the price of a used car. The Arab air forces never recover. But the Israelis aren't the only ones getting Mustangs through the back door. In China, the civil war is entering its final phase. Mao's communists control the north. Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists hold the south, and both sides want Mustangs. The nationalists get theirs first. In 1946, as part of American aid to the Republic of China, the United States transfers 113 P-51D and K models to the Chinese Nationalist Air Force. American pilots, officially civilian advisors, train Chinese pilots in their use. The hope is that air superiority will offset the communists' numerical advantage on the ground. It doesn't work. The problem isn't the aircraft, it's logistics. The nationalists can't get parts, can't get ammunition, can't get fuel. Packard Merlin engines are incredibly reliable unless you run them on low-octane Chinese gasoline, contaminated with water and sediment, which is exactly what happens. By 1948, fewer than 20 nationalist Mustangs are still airworthy. The communists, ironically, end up with more. Not because the Soviets give them Mustangs. Stalin's Air Force has no use for American fighters. The communists get their Mustangs because nationalist pilots keep defecting, taking their aircraft with them. By the time the nationalists retreat to Taiwan in 1949, the People's Liberation Army Air Force has captured or acquired at least 32 P-51 Mustangs in flyable condition. They'll use them against American pilots 4 years later. Korea. June 1950. The war breaks out and suddenly the United States needs fighters again. Lots of them. Fast. The problem is, the U.S. Air Force is now fully committed to jets. F-80 Shooting Stars, F-84 Thunderjets. The age of the piston fighter is supposed to be over. Except jets have a problem in Korea. Range. The early jets guzzle fuel. They can't loiter over the battlefield. Can't provide extended close air support. And when you're trying to stop a North Korean armor column racing south, you need something that can stay overhead for hours, not minutes. You need Mustangs. The Air Force starts pulling them out of storage. The problem is, most of them are gone, scrapped, sold, destroyed. What's left is a mix of Air National Guard units still flying them and a few hundred in long-term storage that haven't been completely cannibalized yet. They're not enough, so the Air Force does something extraordinary. They buy back Mustangs from the countries they sold them to. The Australians return 20. The Canadians return 16. Sweden, still neutral, politely declines. The Swiss want to help, but their Mustangs have been re-engined, and the Air Force doesn't want them. And then there are the civilian Mustangs. In the United States, after the war, a few hundred Mustangs ended up in private hands. Crop dusters, air racers, rich men's toys, some of them barely modified, some of them stripped down to the bare airframe and rebuilt as unlimited racing machines. The Air Force sends out word, "We'll buy them back." All of them, no questions asked. A rancher in Montana sells back a Mustang he's been using to herd cattle. An oil executive in Texas returns one he bought as a personal transport. The Cleveland Air Races surrender 12, including the current unlimited champion, a clipped-wing monster named Baguine that's been hitting 470 miles per hour in level flight. They're all repainted Air Force gray and shipped to Korea. By September 1950, the 18th Fighter Bomber Wing is flying combat missions over North Korea in aircraft that, 6 months earlier, were dusting cotton fields in Alabama. The results are mixed. Against North Korean armor and supply columns, the Mustangs are devastating. Low, slow, accurate. The P-51 guns chew up trucks and troops. The rockets and bombs hit hard. But against MiG-15 jets, they're hopelessly outclassed. The first encounter happens in November 1950. A flight of 4 Mustangs from the 18th is strafing a rail line near Sinuiju when 6 MiG-15s drop out of the clouds. The MiGs are faster, they climb better, they're more heavily armed, and the Chinese pilots flying them are good. 3 of the 4 Mustangs are shot down in less than 2 minutes. The 4th escapes only because the MiG pilot runs out of ammunition. It's a wake-up call. The Air Force pulls the Mustangs back from the northern sectors, keeps them south of the Yalu River, away from MiG Alley. The Mustangs will spend the rest of the Korean War doing what they do best: close air support, interdiction, ground attack. Dangerous work, but work they excel at. By the time the armistice is signed in 1953, American Mustangs have flown over 62,000 combat sorties in Korea. They've destroyed an estimated 3,200 vehicles, 900 rail cars, and 600 buildings. They've also lost 351 aircraft to ground fire, accidents, and the occasional MiG. But the strangest chapter in Mustang history isn't American at all. It's Indonesian. In 1958, the CIA is running a covert war in Indonesia. The goal is to destabilize President Sukarno, who's leaning too close to the communists for Washington's liking. The agency recruits a group of Indonesian rebel colonels, arms them, and provides air support in the form of American pilots flying American aircraft under false flags. The aircraft of choice? Surplus P-51 Mustangs, purchased through shell companies and smuggled into Sumatra. The pilots are a mix of CIA contractors and former World War II and Korea vets looking for one last adventure. They're paid $10,000 a month, a fortune in 1958, to fly ground attack missions against Indonesian government forces. The Mustangs are painted with fake Indonesian rebel markings. The fiction is that the rebels have their own air force. Nobody believes it. On May 18, 1958, an American pilot named Alan Lawrence Pope is flying a P-51 Mustang on a strafing run near Ambon when Indonesian anti-aircraft fire hits his engine. Pope bails out. He's captured immediately. In his survival vest, Indonesian forces find his CIA credentials, his pay stubs, and a personal letter from the U.S. ambassador to Thailand. The operation is blown. Eisenhower denies everything. Pope, he claims, is a rogue adventurer with no connection to the U.S. government. The Indonesians don't buy it. Pope is tried, convicted of war crimes, and sentenced to death. He'll spend 4 years in an Indonesian prison before being quietly released in a prisoner swap that the United States will never officially acknowledge. The Mustangs are abandoned, left to rot in the Sumatran jungle. But even after Indonesia, even after Korea, even after Israel, the Mustang keeps flying. In smaller air forces, in stranger wars, the Dominicans buy 34 in 1948 and use them to suppress internal rebellions until 1964. The Nicaraguan Air Force flies them until 1961. Haiti operates a handful until 1973, mostly for airshow demonstrations and the occasional drug interdiction mission that's really just an excuse for the dictator's son to go flying. El Salvador flies Mustangs in the football war of 1969, a four-day conflict with Honduras triggered by rioting at a World Cup qualifier match. Salvadoran Mustangs strafe Honduran airfields. Honduran Corsairs and Thunderbolts shoot back. It's the last time piston engine fighters engage in air-to-air combat anywhere on Earth. The Salvadoran Mustangs win, barely. And then finally, the military service ends. By 1970, every air force in the world has retired the Mustang. The last holdouts, Bolivia and the Philippines, fly their final operational sorties in 1972. 54 years after the prototype's first flight, 30 years after it entered combat, the P-51 Mustang is finally obsolete. But the story doesn't end there either, because by the 1970s something unexpected is happening. The Mustangs that survived, the ones that weren't scrapped, weren't crashed, weren't left to rot in some jungle or desert, are becoming valuable. Not as weapons, as history. Warbird collectors start hunting them down, restoring them, flying them at airshows. And the prices start climbing. A Mustang sold for $1,500 in 1946 is worth $50,000 in 1975. By 1985, $200,000. By 2000, over $1 million. Today, a fully restored combat veteran P-51D can sell for $6 to $8 million. There are approximately 175 airworthy Mustangs left in the world. Most are in the United States, a few in Europe, 3 in Australia, 1 in New Zealand. They fly at Reno, at Oshkosh, at small county airfields where old men bring their grandchildren to see the aircraft their grandfathers flew. But here's the number that matters. Of the 15,686 P-51 Mustangs built during World War II, fewer than 200 complete airframes exist anywhere on Earth. The rest are gone, scrapped, destroyed, lost. Which means the United States government, in its wisdom, took the most successful fighter aircraft in American history and erased 99% of them from existence within 5 years of winning the war. Not because they were obsolete, not because they were worn out, because aluminum was worth 23 cents a pound. And yet, in a strange way, the handful that survived did more after the war than they ever did during it. They helped create Israel. They fought in Korea. They showed up in Indonesia, in Central America, in the skies over the Sinai. They became the weapon of choice for every small air force that needed something fast, cheap, and deadly. The P-51 Mustang didn't retire after World War II. It went freelance. And for the men who flew them in those strange, forgotten wars, the Israelis over Tel Aviv, the CIA contractors over Sumatra, the Salvadorans in the football war, the Mustang was never a relic. It was the thing that kept them alive, the thing that won the fight, the thing that proved one more time that the best fighter of the Second World War was still good enough for the third one and the fourth, and every dirty little conflict in between. The last recorded combat mission by a P-51 Mustang took place in July 1969, El Salvador, a ground attack run against a Honduran supply depot. The pilot's name is lost to history. The Mustang returned safely. It always did.